What happens when a black woman in first class is mistaken for an intruder twice? And what will the crew do when they realize she's not only a doctor, but the captain's wife? If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories that matter. Carpet changed under her shoes. That subtle shift from the coarse hallway outside to the thick blue-gray fabric of the first-class boarding lane was one Simone Avery had walked across many times. Still, it never felt like neutral ground, especially not today. She moved with quiet grace, her cream-colored trench coat falling just above the knees, a dark leather carry-on gliding smoothly behind her. Her silk scarf, a soft maroon, caught the light as she stepped forward. Calm, professional, unbothered. But not unaware. The energy shifted before she reached the gate. It always did, subtle like the temperature dropping half a degree. The way the conversations ahead of her quieted ever so slightly. The way someone in the priority lane turned, then turned again, like their brain needed a second glance to reconcile what they were seeing. Simone didn't flinch. She never did. Instead, she held her phone out, boarding pass ready, smile faint but polite. The gate agent, a blonde woman in her late 20s with a sharp bob and sharper eyes, barely looked up. Melissa, the name tag read. "Hi," Simone offered. Melissa took the phone, glanced at the screen, then looked at Simone, not at her face through her, as if waiting for someone else to step up and claim the name on the pass. "This is for first class," Melissa asked, voice light but clipped, almost musical in its artificial sweetness. Simone's expression didn't change. "Yes." A beat passed. Melissa tapped the screen again, then glanced toward the line as if waiting for confirmation from somewhere that never came. "I just need to double-check something," she said, holding Simone's phone longer than necessary. Behind Simone, someone gave a quiet sigh, a deep, tired one. "Here we go again," came the voice. A man, older, black, familiar with this song and dance. Simone didn't turn. Melissa finally handed the phone back, still with that manufactured smile. "You're good to go." "I know," Simone said softly, then stepped forward onto the jet bridge, heels silent on the soft carpet, eyes forward. She didn't look back, but she could feel it. Melissa's eyes, the hesitation, the weight of doubt. She carried it with her like her carry-on, except this one wasn't hers to begin with. The cabin air was cooler than she expected. Simone stepped into the first-class section with the kind of composure that didn't need to announce itself. Her stride didn't falter, even as the sensation of being watched clung to her like static. Seat 2A, window side. She placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment without a sound, then lowered herself into the wide leather seat with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times and had been questioned nearly every single time. Her blouse was crisp, tucked just so. Her scarf, a subtle swirl of burgundy and charcoal, sat elegantly against her collarbone. Nothing about her appearance was accidental, it never was. "Don't let this ruin your morning," she told herself. Not out loud, never out loud, but the voice was firm in her mind like a hand on her shoulder. She tapped the side of the armrest, found the seat controls, reclined ever so slightly. Outside the window, the morning fog curled around the tarmac like a veil, beautiful, quiet, untouchable. She liked flights like this. Early, dim light, few people awake enough to bother her, and yet tension already sat beside her, unwelcome and uninvited. The kind that doesn't speak but breathes heavy in the seat next to yours. She tried to ignore it. She always did. She reached for her Kindle, swiped it on, then turned it off just as quickly. Her heart wasn't in it yet. Not with the aftertaste of that gate agent still lingering. The worst part wasn't the questioning. It was the pause, that little beat of disbelief between first class and "you're good to go." As if someone like her could only exist in luxury by mistake. Simone shifted in her seat, folding one leg over the other, smoothing the crease in her slacks. She inhaled deeply, held it for a count of 4, then let it go. Her heartbeat slowed. "Let it pass," she told herself. "You're here, you belong. And they don't get to steal this moment." She had seen this before. Not this plane, not this moment, but the feeling. The sting of being quietly questioned in a space you rightfully occupied. It wasn't new. It started years ago in a different airport with different people, but the same look. She had been 12. Her legs still dangled when she sat, her feet not quite touching the floor. Her mother, dressed in navy blue scrubs and white sneakers, had taken the middle seat. They were flying from Houston to Chicago, a conference for cardiac nurses, and her mother had decided just once to splurge on first class. It was supposed to be special, until the attendant approached with a furrowed brow and a forced smile. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right seat?" Her mother had blinked, confused, pulled out the boarding pass. "Yes, 3B." The woman took the pass, scanned it, frowned again. "Can I see your ID?" 12-year-old Simone had watched, wide-eyed, as something shifted in her mother's face. Not surprise, she'd seen it coming. Not anger, she was too tired for that, just resignation. A few minutes later, a supervisor came over. There were murmured apologies, an awkward laugh. "Oh, it's just protocol." The seats were theirs, but the moment had already been taken. They spent the flight in silence. Her mother didn't open her magazine. Simone didn't open her book. Later, as they waited for their luggage, her mother had knelt beside her and said something she never forgot. "Being good at what you do won't stop them from doubting you. So don't waste energy proving you belong, just be. And when you fight, make sure it counts." That memory sat in her chest now, like a folded letter she never threw away. Simone had lived by those words. She wouldn't yell, wouldn't explain herself, but she'd never let them erase her. The cabin had settled into that gentle lull that came after takeoff. Tray tables clicked open, newspapers unfolded, champagne flutes filled with quiet fizz. Simone had just begun to breathe into the stillness when Melissa appeared beside her again. Same forced smile, same nervous eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said softly, though her tone still carried that sharp undertone. "I just wanted to confirm, you're in 2A, correct?" Simone didn't look up right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the slow swirl of bubbles in her untouched glass. "I am," she said. Melissa hesitated. "It's just we're expecting a VIP in first class, and I thought—" Simone finally turned her head. "And what do I look like to you?" she asked, her voice velvet and steel all at once. Melissa blinked. "I didn't mean, I'm sure you didn't." Simone didn't raise her voice, didn't shift in her seat. "But the question still stands." Melissa's mouth opened, then closed again. Stepped back, mumbled something like "just checking," and disappeared down the aisle. Simone exhaled through her nose, long and steady. She reached for her Kindle again, but her focus had fractured. The soft hum of the cabin was no longer soothing. It buzzed. Then she heard it 2 rows behind her, whispers. "Never seen her before, just sitting there like she owns it," Melissa's voice. The words weren't sharp, but the tone was unmistakable, uncertain, suspicious, small. Simone closed her eyes, then she stood. Slowly, deliberately. Each movement was precise, controlled, like she was scrubbing the moment clean of anyone else's interpretation. She stepped into the aisle and approached where Melissa stood near the galley, chatting too openly with James, who immediately straightened at the sight of Simone. Melissa turned mid-laugh and froze. "I'm curious," Simone said evenly. "Do you memorize every face in first class or just mine?" Silence. Melissa paled, her lips parting with no words behind them. "I showed my ticket. Twice, I answered your questions. Now I hear you speculating out loud." I didn't mean anything by it. "But you did," Simone cut in, still calm. "And I want you to sit with that, quietly." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked back to her seat, heels soft on the carpet, eyes forward. The kind of walk that said, "I don't need permission. I don't need forgiveness. I am the moment you remember." When Simone returned to her seat, the cabin wasn't the same. The hum of casual conversation had dimmed. Pages stopped turning. Champagne flutes hung mid-air. Heads had turned, not all at once, but enough that she could feel their eyes, feel the tension hanging above them like pressurized air waiting to release. Simone didn't look at any of them. She reclined her seat by a few degrees, folded her hands on her lap, and exhaled slowly. Not victory, just release. Across the aisle, the older black gentleman adjusted his reading glasses, then looked over at her with a small, knowing smile. "You didn't raise your voice," he said quietly, "but the whole cabin heard you." Simone didn't smile back, but the corner of her mouth softened, just enough. "I wasn't trying to make noise," she murmured. He nodded, folding his newspaper neatly. "You didn't have to. That's what made it louder." Melissa hadn't returned. At some point during Simone's walk back, she'd vanished to the rear of the plane, leaving only James to quietly offer drinks down the aisle. He didn't glance Simone's way. No one did now, not directly, not with the same curiosity or doubt. The air had shifted. Where there was skepticism, now there was silence. Where there was judgment, now hesitation. Simone leaned back against the plush headrest, closing her eyes for a moment. She hadn't set out to prove anything. She never did. But sometimes, when you stand without flinching, the room has no choice but to sit up straighter. The cockpit door unlatched with a soft click. At first, no one reacted. Cabin doors opened all the time for restroom breaks, a stretch, a whispered exchange between crew. But this time there was no rush in the movement, no casual shift of limbs or distracted glance. Captain Elijah Avery stepped into the first-class cabin and everything paused, tall, broad-shouldered, calm. His uniform immaculate, white shirt pressed to perfection, epaulets glinting under the overhead light. His hat rested beneath one arm, the other hand free, relaxed but intentional. He wasn't looking around. He was looking for someone. His gaze landed on her, Simone, and the air seemed to tighten around them. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just felt. The older gentleman across the aisle arched an eyebrow and set down his cup. Passengers shifted in their seats, subtly straightening, unsure what was happening, but feeling somehow that it mattered. Elijah approached with even steps, then stopped beside her seat. "Sorry for the delay," he said, voice low and warm, threaded with a smile only she would catch. "Missed you." Simone tilted her head, lips curling just slightly. "I noticed." Melissa's tray clinked behind them. She had reappeared from the galley just in time to see it, Elijah standing next to the woman she doubted, speaking to her with unmistakable familiarity. Her posture faltered. Elijah turned his head slowly. "Everything all right, miss?" "Melissa," she supplied quickly, voice thinner than before. "Melissa," he repeated. "You've been looking after my wife, I take it." Silence. Melissa's mouth opened, but only a soft breath came out. "Why, yes, Captain, of course, I didn't realize." Elijah raised a brow. "Didn't realize what?" Melissa flushed. "That she was," she caught herself, "that she was your wife," Simone offered gently. Melissa nodded too quickly. Elijah didn't scold. He didn't need to. He simply looked at her, steady, unreadable, then turned back to Simone. "Everything all right?" he asked. Simone met his eyes for a long moment, then nodded. "Handled." He offered her a quiet smile, a squeeze to her shoulder. And then, just as calmly as he had arrived, he turned and walked back toward the cockpit. Simone adjusted her scarf. Melissa stood frozen for a heartbeat too long before retreating again, this time without a word. The man across the aisle let out a soft laugh. "Well," he said, sipping his drink again, "that explains the altitude." Simone didn't respond right away, but the shift in her shoulders said everything. Melissa returned slower this time, without the polished tray or the hollow smile. Just herself, stripped of performance, standing a few steps from Simone's seat with her hands clasped in front of her like a child waiting to be scolded. "Dr. Avery," she said, voice quieter than before. Simone looked up slowly, her face unreadable. Melissa's voice cracked a little. "I wanted to apologize again. For earlier, I know how it looked. I made assumptions. That's on me." Simone held her gaze, neither hostile nor forgiving, just still. "You don't need to know who I am," she said calmly, "to respect me." Melissa blinked, her cheeks flushed again. "I know, I really do." Simone tilted her head just slightly. "Then remember that the next time someone doesn't fit your picture of who belongs in this cabin." There was no venom in her voice, but the words carried weight. Melissa swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." She hesitated, then nodded and walked away, not retreating but smaller somehow, humbled. And then the shift began. The silence in the cabin, once thick with judgment and curiosity, now stretched differently, like a room holding its breath after witnessing something private but profound. The businessman across the aisle, the one who had tapped his watch impatiently at the gate, turned his head towards Simone and offered her a quiet, almost sheepish nod. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. 2 seats over, the elderly woman with the pearl earrings adjusted herself and gently moved her purse from the shared armrest. She smoothed her skirt and gave Simone the kind of polite, deferential smile one might offer a judge. Even James, who had said little but seen everything, approached again with a fresh bottle of water and a softer tone. "Dr. Avery," he said respectfully, "would you like anything else?" "No, thank you," Simone replied, her voice even. He nodded and moved on. The energy in first class had realigned. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Now when people looked at her, they saw something they hadn't seen before, or maybe something they couldn't deny anymore. They saw presence, power, not just in title but in how she held herself. Simone didn't seek validation, but recognition, earned and quiet, had finally arrived. And this time the silence around her wasn't suspicion, it was respect. The plane touched down with a gentle thud, wheels kissing the runway like a whispered punctuation mark. Passengers stirred. Seatbelts clicked open. Overhead compartments popped like kernels under pressure as arms reached for bags, shoulders shifted, heads tilted toward aisle space. But Simone didn't move. She stayed seated, calm and still, watching the cabin realign itself after hours of quiet tension. The shift in air pressure was matched by something less measurable, a collective discomfort replaced now by uneasy respect. A few minutes later, the seatbelt sign chimed off. The line to exit formed quickly. First-class passengers gathered their things, offering quick glances at Simone, some curious, others regretful, most simply unsure of how to make space for dignity when it had already passed them by. She stood without urgency, reaching for her carry-on with a smooth, practiced motion. Her scarf remained perfectly draped, her presence undisturbed. At the front of the aircraft, just outside the cockpit, Elijah stood waiting, back in uniform, hat on, hands clasped behind his back. His gaze landed on Simone the second she stepped into the aisle. "Mrs. Avery," he said with a teasing lift of his brow. "Captain," she replied, her tone dry but warm. The businessman from earlier, a man who hadn't said a word since takeoff, suddenly stepped forward. He cleared his throat, avoiding Simone's eyes. "Captain Avery," he muttered, "that was a very smooth landing." Elijah gave a polite nod. "Appreciate it, sir." The man moved on quickly, not looking back. Simone smirked. "Think he's embarrassed?" she murmured. "Oh, definitely," they both chuckled. Then behind her she heard it, footsteps, hesitant, soft. "Dr. Avery, Melissa." Her voice was no longer tight, no longer rehearsed, just real. Simone turned, her expression neutral. "I really do apologize," Melissa said, "for the assumptions and for making you feel like you didn't belong." Simone held her gaze, then spoke, steady and clear. "You shouldn't need someone's title to treat them like they belong." Melissa's eyes lowered. She gave a small, honest nod. Simone didn't say more. She didn't need to. She turned and walked off the plane, Elijah beside her, matching her pace. Two professionals, two equals, two people who didn't demand respect, but carried it like second skin. As they stepped into the terminal, the soft overhead lights spilled across the floor like morning sun. The noise of the airport surrounded them. Announcements, rolling bags, distant laughter. And yet, inside Simone's mind, there was only one quiet thought. Respect doesn't require recognition. It requires humanity.